I am very excited to be in Ho Chi Minh City to take the only non-stop service between Vietnam and the United States on their flag carrier Vietnam Airlines on their flagship aircraft, the A350-900, in business class out to San Francisco. In addition, I have some excellent hacks for getting this business class flight for super cheap, making it the cheapest way I've ever gotten from Asia to the United States in business class in a fantastic product as well. I've also decided I'm going to start a new video series that I'm hoping to have up soon, including some of my more wild travel experiences. This trip will include one of them, as there were all sorts of immigration issues that kept me trapped in the immigration office area until shortly before my flight back to the US. The main reason I bring that up is because this video won't start at the curb or have check-in shots, as I had to just start the process inside the security area. While I may not have started at the curb, I could see it through the other side of the security checkpoint, and these pictures I found online show the exact same thing I saw, which is that it's a fairly average check-in area, and the business class check-ins just a couple of special lines at the normal Vietnam Airlines check-in desks for those sky priority passengers. Now, if, like most people, you're unfamiliar with the demographics of the world, you may wonder why Vietnam chose San Francisco over Los Angeles or New York for their only ever direct service. Let me start by saying that San Jose, the large city about 35 miles south of San Francisco, has the largest Vietnamese population of any city in the world outside of Vietnam, at over 100,000 Viets. San Jose also has a ton of Thai, Filipinos, Cambos, and Laotians, which would definitely enjoy a one-stop flight to Southeast Asia. Interestingly enough, talking to the 4 business class flight attendants, at least 2 of them had family in San Jose that they stay with on overnights, which is super cool and further proves this connection. They also choose San Francisco Airport over San Jose Airport, since that makes it so they can draw the tourism crowd as well. In addition to the fact that San Francisco also has the busiest consulate general to Vietnam in the United States. Vietnam has looked at starting service to Los Angeles or JFK, but at this point, there's no official plans yet. Ho Chi Minh's main airport opened in the 1930s as a military airfield, but eventually gained airline service in the later half of the 20th century. In the 1970s, Pan Am began service to San Francisco via Guam and Manila, and later United began service to San Francisco via Hong Kong until 2011. They also recently announced their plans to start a brand new, absolutely stunning airport for Saigon. The new location will be about 25 to 30 minutes from the present position, but since the current airport's smack dab in the middle of the city, it's limited in its room for expansion, whereas the new airport will not be restricted by these geographic constraints. Sketches and renderings are out and construction has begun as of last year, although the first phase is still years from completion and it's not expected to be entirely completed till about 2035 to 2040, but looks like it will be incredible and I cannot wait to see the new airport once it's completed. The terminal here is just a long hallway with an elbow bend in it, consisting of about 14 jet bridges and some remote stands on top of that. There are also smaller souvenir shops on the concourse, along with duty-free shops, tax refund counters, and this one shop that had all kinds of Vietnamese souvenirs and snacks, and the only view I was able to get of the main entrance hall of the terminal that I got on this trip. This here is their international terminal that we're in now and was constructed in 2007, along with the domestic terminal, which is old and was the sole terminal at the airport until 2007. It's also home to one of the busiest domestic flight routes in the world, from Ho Chi Minh to Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh's airport isn't the largest airport by footprint size, but does serve a good amount of passengers, last year ranking as the 34th busiest airport in the world and one of the largest in Southeast Asia, behind airports like Singapore, Jakarta, and Manila. Plane spotting was interesting at this airport, as there's a good amount of wide bodies, but what I noticed most is that Air France is the only non-Asian carrier, or maybe Turkish Airlines as well, depending on if you consider Turkey to be Europe or Asia. So the connections to Europe are all done with Asian carriers from Ho Chi Minh. Vietnam Airlines has 2 lounges in the international terminal, named appropriately as Lotus Lounge 1 and Lotus Lounge 2. As the Lotus is a theme you'll see continuing throughout Vietnam and Vietnam Airlines, including the design of the new airport. I went over to Lotus Lounge 1 to kill the next 5 hours until my flight's departure, which is located right in the middle of the terminal, immediately through security, upstairs from the duty-free shop. Most of the restaurants are on the upper level near one of the lounges, where you'll have a good view of the airport's ramp and runways. There are a couple of lounges up here, like Bamboo Airways' lounge as well, but this lounge can be used by any SkyTeam business class travelers or SkyTeam status members. I will also say that they are definitely proud of their Skytrax 4-star rating, and you'll see signs for it scattered around and on their pre-recorded voice when you call into their phone number. The Lotus 1 lounge may not be the largest lounge in the world, but it does have most of the amenities that you'd want before your flight. There's a good amount of seats, although potentially better for groups than single travelers, as the most comfortable seating is in groups of seats. I do like these little huts against the walls that are good for groups, but especially I like the look that it adds to the lounge. The lounge is basically just one big L, so you can see that it continues around the corner, with the buffet against one wall and then groups of 4 seats against the window. The good thing I will say is that this lounge never got more than about 50% full, so seating wasn't really too big of an issue for the 5 hours I spent here. On the far side of the lounge, there's a more private area with a massage chair for those who want a little more relaxation before their flight. Next to that is a business center where you'll find computers with wired internet, also connected to a printer. By far, the best part of the lounge was the food, in an enormous buffet starting with eggs and roasted chicken. Next was some chicken sausage, scrambled eggs, and potatoes, so I guess they like chicken and egg in Vietnam. Then was some Hanoi-style rice, along with some additives for the rice. Then you found some udon noodles and sautéed vegetables, followed by some congee, which I once upon a time ate plain and wondered why people liked it. I then learned that, just like in this lounge, you're supposed to add things to it. To add to the congee, they had salted eggs, minced meat, limes, chilies, and then a ton of sauces. Just past the lot of plates and bowls and silverware was some sort of soup, although I forgot exactly what it was, unfortunately, at this point. Then was some amazing spring rolls and veggie-filled dumplings. And next came a cabbage and carrot salad with some spicy mayo and sweet and sour fish sauce. They also had different types of breads, all with different types of breads and jams, in addition to a toaster for the breads as well. You can also make a little sandwich, as they have salami, ham, and cheese under one of these trays. Then was the most beautiful food arrangement I have ever seen in a lounge. They spent a lot of time making it look good, and the amazing staff was continuously stocking it. It started with some dumplings and then some mini skewers, along with some cheesy bread and sweeter muffins, next to some cereal parfaits. There was also a section that was meant solely for butter, and then an amazing display using only parts of the vegetables that they had available. They also had a ton of amazing fruit next to that, including some passion fruit, and below that looked like raw eggs in a bowl, but the sign said pumpkin sweet soup with semolina. They also had some dragon fruit with peach muffins and a snack just labeled as jelly. Fun fact, from now on I'll be sharing my current emotion using solely Vietnamese jelly snacks. Around the corner was mostly just the drinks, where they had a coffee machine, which could also just get you some hot water, which was useful considering it was right next to a large assortment of teas. There was also some juice and additional tea snacks next to that. And next to that was some cereal, I'm assuming to put with the milk that was in the beverage section. There is a self-serve bar section where you can get yourself some wine, beer, or hard alcohol, either from what was on the counter in addition to what was in the fridge below. Lastly was a soda fountain with Pepsi products, and next to that was a large fridge with some awesome choices, including my personal favorite, soursop nectar, which is a relative of cherimoya or guanabana, which is a fruit common in Latin countries that I love to enjoy whenever I can find it. I did pretty well for myself at the buffet. I hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours due to my traveling and the immigration debacle. Because of that, I got almost a little bit of everything. I made myself a ham and cheese sandwich using the spring roll dip as a spread on the bread. I also got some of the fruit, as Southeast Asia has some of the highest quality of fruit in the world. I also tried the spring rolls and dumplings, then a cheesy bread and skewer, then I got some congee, this time with toppings, and lastly one of those cereal and yogurt parfaits for dessert. all of course with some soursop juice. I grabbed one of the seats by the window, although it was a group of 4, so I planned to move if a group of 4 came in and there wasn't any space for them, although we never really ran into that problem. The seat was very comfortable, but the only problem was that these seats didn't have any charging outlets, which was unfortunate, but I figured I could charge all my stuff once I got in the airplane. Lastly, the best part of the lounge is that they do have 2 showers available. The weird part is that they are just kind of 2 stalls in the main restroom area, making them a bit less private than normal shower suites that you'd find in an airport lounge. Regardless, however, I'm always just excessively grateful to have any shower before these long flights, and so as long as I can shower, you won't get much critique from me. And now, as it was absolutely dumping rain on and off, I want to talk a bit about an absolute hack to booking this business class flight. Essentially, upgrades with Vietnam Airlines are better the closer that you get to departure. If you monitor the cost of your flight and especially book a connecting flight, you'll find that there's commonly discounts on the premium economy fares. If you can purchase that, I would definitely suggest it. I got a premium economy fare initially from Singapore to Ho Chi Minh, connecting to San Francisco for about $700. At the time of booking, it was only about $100 more than the economy fare. From that point on, the cost to upgrade to business class required me to pay the difference in fare, which did reduce slightly over time but sat at about an additional $1,800 US. That was until check-in. 24 hours before departure, the upgrade fee dropped significantly. I got the premium economy upgrade to business class for $375 US, and it looked like the economy to business class upgrade was about $700 US. So you can see why I say to book premium economy initially, if at all possible. This meant that I technically booked a business class flight on a 12,600 kilometer or 7,900 mile journey for just under $1,100 US, tied for my all-time cheapest trans-Pacific business class with Philippine Airlines. The main thing I will advise is to monitor the seating chart. It's possible that the flight fills up and then waiting could cause you to lose the upgrade. Luckily, my flight was fairly full in economy but nearly empty in business class with about 2/3 of the seats left, but I still kept checking about 2 to 3 times per day. There is one major drawback to these upgrades. If you upgrade your ticket after the booking is made, that only applies to the in-flight experience. This meant that I could not get complimentary lounge access in Ho Chi Minh City. So you're probably wondering how I'm sitting here now, and essentially, for all Vietnam Airlines travelers who didn't initially book business class, you can purchase 4 hours of lounge access for $45, which I felt was worth it for me today since I didn't get access to my hotel and wanted to relax and shower, and I would have had to buy a meal regardless, so that's my travel hack for booking, but keep that note in mind. That's enough of the lounge though, partially because we boarded in a little under an hour, but mostly because my 4 hours was up. So it was time for me to leave the lounge, and I decided to head past the food court, back downstairs to the main part of the terminal, and eventually off to my gate where I could wait near the queue to be one of the first people on board my airplane. I was at gate 15 today where they were doing some kind of checks, but when I walked up, the agent just waved me through without doing anything, so I'm not quite sure what they were checking there. It looked like once people were down in the gate area, they really preferred that they stay down there, although there is a shop down there and restrooms for passengers waiting for gates 15 and 16. I was also able to get a great view of our 6-year-old A350-900, which is a leased aircraft but has spent its entire life flying under the paint and operation of Vietnam Airlines. They did have a section of seating right near the boarding gate for those needing some extra assistance getting down the jet bridge that was right next to the business class boarding lane, so I hung out around there while maintaining out of the way so that they could get boarding underway expeditiously. I also spotted a bit of a typo. As you'll realize, San Francisco spelled correctly on the screens at the gate, but on the counter was another little sign that had a different spelling of the city. I'm just wondering how long it's been like that, or maybe if that's how it's spelled if you're writing it in some Vietnamese dialect. The business class section of my flight seemed to be a bit less than 50% full, but economy looked extremely full as evidenced by how crowded the gate area was. Finally, after boarding wheelchairs for almost 30 minutes, we began boarding business class passengers. Excitingly, I was the first to get on board and see the cabin, as I was curious to see how things would work out, as I've heard they were a bit anti-camera. It seems as if Vietnam Airlines widebodies sport two business class setups, both in a 1-2-1 setup, but one is facing forward in the same setup as my Azul video, and the other is the reverse herringbone setup, which we get on this airplane. The good thing about the reverse herringbone is that all seats are created equal, whereas the other setup alternates between being closer to the aisle or the window. Regardless though, the best thing was the second I reached my seat, the crew was waiting to bring me a welcome towel and beverages, of which I chose the watermelon juice. The crew also continued to be wonderfully attentive and gracious throughout the entirety of the flight. While we wait for everyone else to get on board, however, let's tour this seat. Starting off, the leather-type headrest has the Vietnam Airlines logo on the protective cloth. The seat was moderately cushioned and comfortable with a continued flower design throughout. They also have a similar seatbelt to Singapore Airlines, which seems to have an airbag of sorts built into the lap belt. Over your shoulder is a reading light that has a button that can vary its brightness. There's also the TV remote next to that. I've been seeing this exact remote in a lot of new airplanes, which is strange because it looks aged. As a matter of fact, the 15-year-old Air India 777 I flew had a very similar looking remote. Weird stuff, man. In front of that is a panel where it looks like they could have up to 4 ports, but we just had a USB and a headset plug. Maybe they could look into adding a USB-C in one of those, as those are becoming more popular. Below that is the seat controls, where you can adjust the recline and seat position, but not the leg rest, because there is no leg rest. Like the ANA A380, rather than a leg rest, the entire seat just slides forward to meet the footrest. Directly below that section of the seat with the utilities is where you'll find the large armrest that slopes up to the main counter. On the front of that little bit of the seat shell is a little cubby. There isn't space for any storage other than a hook for hanging your headset, although I do wish the seat design could maybe make this additional storage by adding a support ledge on the front or a little door to enclose it. It looked to me like most seats had 2 windows, although a couple only had 1 window that was aligned well enough. The good thing with the A350 is just how big these windows are. The visibility you have, especially forwards and backwards, being amazing. There is a counter against the window, and while it may not be the largest counter in the world, it had enough free space for whatever I could need it for. I didn't have any issues with space, so any larger would just be stealing space from the seat itself. The tray table is more of the same. It pulls out from under the counter and is a bit smaller than the average tray table, but at no time was there a lack of space. It fit the meals and my computer perfectly fine. I feel like there will be comments about the lack of space, but especially with these 2 spaces combined, there was more than enough space for me, and it felt like it left more space for the seat itself. Just below the counter was where we find the universal charging port, which I used to charge my computer, which it charged insanely fast. There's also a bit of storage down there, including a water bottle holder, which they didn't hand out until we were in flight, and a literature pocket, which had the normal items for $7.87? Just kidding, when I pulled them out I realized it was just an unfortunately placed gap to access things that may have fallen in. In front of you, as is normal with these reverse herringbone seats, this TV folds into the seat back in front of you and can be released with the push of a button. Some airlines want these stowed for takeoff and landing, which can be a bummer if you're in the middle of a show, but they didn't seem to have a problem with it on this flight. Below that is the footrest, which actually seemed to be a fairly good size, although it did pinch off the deeper you went. At 5'9", I had plenty of space for my feet to move around, but if you were taller, your feet may get a bit more cramped. Below that is some storage space, although unfortunately it wasn't quite big enough for my backpack, although it was perfect for my shoes once I got in flight. Perhaps my biggest issue with this seat is that it isn't very private. It remains fairly open to the aisle, and the people in the middle seats can see right into the window seats a bit easier than the window seat people can see into the aisle seats. To help with this, there is a small partition that can be raised and also serves as an armrest. It does help, but doesn't entirely fix the problem. There's also a little storage cubby, which serves as the only enclosed storage in this seat, which was great for chargers and amenities and even fit my laptop. Overhead, something I do like in the A350s, is that in business class there is no overhead bins, so the cabin feels twice as large. They can only do this in business class, however, because there's less people and therefore less bags. Speaking of the overhead, unfortunately there is no overhead air vents on A350s, and this plane was kept quite warm. Then taking a look at the amenities that come with the seat, starting with this thing, which I thought was a blanket, although it proved later to be the mattress pad. Then was this comforter that was actually fairly comfortable and super warm. The last of this bedding was the pillow, which was comfortable but unfortunately a bit small, and I ended up using a balled up hoodie for sleep later on in the flight for a bit more volume. We also got noise cancelling headphones, which came with these protective guards for the earpieces. Unfortunately, these headphones did start to hurt my ears after wearing them for a little while. We were also given these slippers, which the crew actually set up for us to put on, but I wanted to get a quick shot of them before getting too comfy. Lastly was the amenity kit, which they came by and passed out, which included some of the basic items like a comb, eye mask, toothbrush, toothpaste, and earplugs. For some reason though, I forgot to include that in the first shot. They also included these socks. It also included some lotion and lip balm from the brand Chariol, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. The last thing it included was these stickers to let the crew know if they should wake you for any services. I didn't want to miss a meal, so I chose that sticker and placed it on the coat hook since there was no clear spot that they wanted it. Although it got some weird looks, so I'm guessing most people just tend to not use them. The lavatory on Vietnam Airlines' A350s is remarkably basic and resembles pretty much every other A350 lavatory. Although the air freshener they were using was great, and they did have this one little plant here on the wall. They did have some bottles with minimal labels and barely in English, so I'm assuming there was a lotion and a perfume type spray. They also had a drawer with these little packets which contained a razor and shaving cream. Before we pushed back, I also got my slippers and tucked my shoes underneath the footrest where they fit much better than my backpack, which I kept in the overhead bin. And now as we taxi out, a little bit about the connection between these countries. As mentioned, they have been connected to the US solely via San Francisco throughout history, although always with a connection in either Hong Kong, Guam, or Manila. This service was important for them to have a service between the two well-connected countries. In addition, Bamboo Airways also got authorization to fly from Hanoi to San Francisco back in 2021, although I'm a bit unclear why that route never actually began. For this route, however, if I remember correctly, the plan was originally for a 4-time weekly service, and it seems like that may have varied a bit since it launched, but currently sits at 3 times weekly service, in which the economy and premium economy seats seem to be almost completely full, but the business class seems fairly empty. The lady in front of me commented that it was weird how empty it was, so maybe it was just because this was a midweek flight, but I wonder what kind of plans they have if they can't fill this business class of these aircraft. It isn't entirely a surprise, as SFO to Saigon round trip in business class with Vietnam Airlines will run you for around $7,000, whereas you could get other airlines like Philippine Airlines or Japan Airlines for closer to $3,000 or $4,000. I do wonder if a slight reduction in cost would fill the cabins and make more money overall, or if this flight really is more rare and if the business class cabin is typically full, because I would hate to see this route go away. Once we got in the air, they handed out the menus and came by to take our dinner orders. You'll see that first was the drink list, which started off by showing us the champagne and wine options available on today's flight. That was followed by their signature cocktails, of which they had 3. One was more citrusy, one with more fruitiness and ginger, and one that was coffee-based. They also listed the rest of their cocktails and alcohols, including the beer and sake list. And lastly was the coffee and tea available. Then was the actual dining menu, which started with a wonderful welcome. These menus were actually the menus specifically for Vietnam flight number 98 from Ho Chi Minh City to San Francisco. The return leg and other flights in the network have other menus and other options. First, they listed the beverages. It was much less than the full drink menu, but it was nice to see it here, as well as it included much more non-alcoholic options. Then was all the food options. There was 2 pages, as there was 2 meals. First, they were listed entirely in Vietnamese, but the following page had it in English. We were given a dinner as we departed in the late afternoon, and then a lunch meal before arrival, as we arrived actually at about the same time we departed due to crossing the international date line. For each meal, we could pick the Vietnamese or European style meal, which each had a couple main course options within. Then looking through the entertainment options, which I was curious about since they fly mostly within Asia, so I was curious to see what kind of worldwide and especially English options they had. The main page has featured shows and movies that they were showing off at the moment. The movies were sortable by genre in the upper left, which I didn't see until later. Instead, here you can see all of the selections without sorting, where there's about 100 selections, including some in different languages. Then was the audio, which you can see is sortable via the menu on the left side like the movies were. From there, you can see all of the genres that you can choose from, and within those genres they have a reasonable number of albums that seem to be a complete album that you can visit. Similar to movies, TV shows also have about 100 options. Once again, you can sort by genre just like the movies and the audio. The only drawback is that only some of the shows have multiple episodes, including the new staple of international aviation, Young Sheldon. They do have about 10 different games, which I usually ignore, but maybe one day I'll cave and play one of the seatback games instead of just watching a movie. They also have a kids section, like most airlines offer now, which includes movies, music, TV, and games specifically designed for kids. Then was the map page, which unfortunately was not interactive. It did have a number of different angles, but it just automatically switched between them every few seconds. Also under the Sky Map section was some videos about a number of their domestic locations, which would be great if you were flying Vietnam Airlines to Vietnam and wanted to learn a little about it. Then was the airline's About Us section, which included the airline's history, route map, fleet information, mileage plan information, and onboard experience. The route map had a lot more routes shown than what Vietnam Airlines flies, leading me to believe that this is probably the SkyTeam Alliance route map. In addition, I got to learn about some of their aircraft, including the A350 that I was on at this very moment. In addition, they had a description of how their mileage plan works, but since I was earning Delta miles for this flight, I decided to skip past that. And lastly was the experience videos, which described the different cabins, food, and airport experiences as well. Interestingly enough, they do have an e-reader for people who would prefer to read on board instead of watching some sort of television program or movie. And lastly, just a couple bonus features I was grateful for. First was the ability to add items to favorites, making it easier to find them later on. And the smaller map in the corner that you could open while watching something if you wanted to check in on the progress of the flight. Then came the Wi-Fi. There was nothing showing up, so at one point in flight I asked the crew and they told me the Wi-Fi is coming in the soon and exciting future, but not available at this moment. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, dinner time was upon us. They set up our table and took our drink order. Shortly after, they came around with the amuse-bouche, soup, salad, and drinks. They also came around with baskets of assorted breads. I opted for a dinner roll and some of their garlic bread, which was some of the best garlic bread I've ever had. High praise from someone living adjacent to the garlic capital of the world. The soup and salad were somewhat small, but I did have an entire entree coming soon. The soup, however, was fantastic. The main part of the starter was some meats and potato salad, a hearty way to begin this dinner service. And as always, you know I love when airlines put their personal touch on their silverware, and Vietnam Airlines does just that by carving their logo into the base of their silverware on board. I also want to call attention to the drink I ordered, the beloved Hue, which was one of the best things I've had on an airplane, with so many flavors of fruitiness and ginger. Eventually, it was time for the main course, for which I chose the Vietnamese fish option, which was grilled dory with chili lemongrass sauce with rice and steamed veggies. And I have to say, the fish was cooked perfectly, but the sauce stole the show. It was so incredibly tasty. In addition, I got sparkling water in a bottle, and asked for a Coke, but was told they only had Pepsi products on board. Then it was time for dessert, which came in waves and was hands down the best dessert service I've ever had on an airplane. The flight attendants came by with trays of items to each passenger that was finished with the main course and had their plates cleared. First off was an amazing cheese spread. They offered me one of everything, but I was so full I only took a couple of cheeses and crackers with some small fruit to go with it. I thought that was it, but then she returned with a fruit platter asking what I wanted from that. Then I was sure that was it. Then she returned again with ice cream and drink options. I chose to go with a nice chamomile tea to complement my ice cream, but since her dessert tray had some Irish cream on it, I couldn't turn that down and had to accept it. All in all, one of the most complete and well-rounded meal services of all time, but especially the dessert services. Once everything wrapped up, we were also given still water bottles as well for our night's rest. Then I wanted to check out the seat in its different modes, starting, of course, with the fully seated position where we were for takeoff, landing, and dining. The seat is controlled by this main panel and allows shortcuts for relax mode and lie flat, including being able to move each piece individually. As we get into the relaxed position, you'll notice that there's no footrest. This meant that in order to just relax, you could move the entire seat up to reach the footrest. Although personally, I'd prefer a leg rest, allowing for some more relaxing positions. From there, we continued reclining it into the fully lie-flat position. The seat does go entirely 100% flat and joins with the footrest to make one continuous surface. Once a flight attendant realized I was now standing up playing with the seat, she came to offer a turn-down service, a wonderful but disappearing feature of modern business classes. After the mattress pad, she offered to make the bed in its entirety, but as I wanted to take some footage of the bedding itself, I thanked her and told her I could take care of the rest. So I guess they aren't as anti-cameras as others have said previously. The mattress pad isn't very thick, but it does at least cover the lumps and gaps at least, giving you a flat surface to sleep on. Then, by adding the rest of the bedding, you can make a fairly comfortable bed. This bed is definitely wider than most, and so in that sense, it's very comfortable. However, it's fairly firm and the mattress pad doesn't do too much for that. So if you like a firmer bed, you may like this one, but personally, I didn't find it as comfortable as I found others in the past. For the footwell, I found that if you are on your back, you don't really have a ton of space. Although if you lie on your side, you have a bit more space, and I found that much more comfortable. I was able to get comfortable enough to sleep fairly easily, considering last night I slept at the immigration office. So, good night for now. I did have a timer set on my phone in order to make sure I didn't sleep through the rest of the flight, so that I could still have time to enjoy that in-flight experience. Yes, I know I'm weird like that. But it was also daytime now somewhere over the Pacific, and we didn't see any land until arriving into San Francisco and the California West Coast. I went to the restroom at the aft of the business class section this time, where they had dental kits, so it was nice to wake up and brush my teeth to somewhat freshen up, something I was very grateful for and helps you feel a little bit better on landing. Up in the forward galley, they had this little bar set up for people wanting drinks, and then little snacks were available upon request. I personally decided to get the Vietnamese white coffee from the drink menu. And guys, it has officially become the best coffee I've ever had on board an airplane. It was so flavorful and rich and a great way to start my day mid-flight. Although it seems as if they use more milk and condensed milk and therefore create a bit less strong of a blend. The mood lighting soon returned, and then the main lighting was slowly raised as we prepared for our second and final meal of this flight. Service began with a hot towel once more. They also came by to take drink orders, and I panicked and forgot all drink options that have ever existed and ended up with an apple juice. They also set up our place settings and took our orders for this lunch service. The starter for lunch was a grilled prawn with lemongrass, roasted chicken, and a small salad with a mango sesame dressing. Also served with the dessert, which was a Vietnamese sweet corn paste with coconut milk that was so fantastic and flavorful without being overly rich like most Western desserts. Then for my main course, I stuck with the Vietnamese option and went with the roasted duck, with fermented red tofu and fried rice. It may have been some of the better duck I've ever had, which is impressive coming from an airplane meal, but also based on how amazing the duck is that I've had in San Francisco's Chinatown. I also had a nice cup of green tea with my lunch service, since my internal clock was telling me that this should be more of a breakfast, hence the aforementioned apple juice. The last thing I decided to try on this flight, by the recommendation of our flight's excellent purser, was their other signature coffee, the Vietnamese iced coffee, which was now probably the second best coffee I've ever had on an airplane, only after the white coffee that I just tried earlier this flight. Now obviously I'm a fan of this route, as I love when my home airport gets some love from more international airlines. Vietnam Airlines seems to be very proud of this route and their Category 1 FAA rating, allowing them to add US routes. My only worry is seeing how empty the business class cabin was on this flight. What I will say is that about 6 years ago, when Vietnam Airlines was initially looking to add their US flights, they admitted their forecast showed that they would be losing money slightly by adding these US flights, but they still intended to launch the service. Roughly a year ago, after a year of operating this route, they published their load factor numbers. Reports showed they had carried about 60,000 passengers in the first year between San Francisco and Ho Chi Minh City, putting them at about a 72% load factor on that operation, and it looked like they were on the rise ever so slowly. Typical numbers around 70% or so are needed for break-even, but that does vary based on each airline's factors. We may get to see a few new numbers at the end of this year, once it's officially been around for another full year, and I'll be curious to see if it remains at or above break-even. I'm also curious to see if Vietnam Airlines launches Los Angeles or New York flights, or if they're nervous that it would take away passengers currently connecting on this flight, keeping its load factor a little higher. Alternatively, if it does remain at or above break-even, we may finally see Bamboo Airways use their highly coveted Category 1 FAA rating and finally launch their long-anticipated and planned Hanoi to San Francisco route. When it comes down to it though, it's just fun seeing the post-COVID expansion of airlines and what it's doing to this industry. I did have to take a while to think about my thoughts on this flight, because after I took it, I couldn't help but feel like I wanted to take it again, and felt like I really enjoyed it, but I couldn't quite place why, since there were definitely some places where it felt like it was lacking. Basically, the conclusion I reached after about a week of contemplating is that Vietnam Airlines offers a fantastic product, but does have some aspects they need to upgrade if they truly want to become one of the world's top competing airlines. They also need to take a major look at the pricing in my opinion, considering San Francisco to Ho Chi Minh round-trip business class for these dates was about $6,000 to $7,000, but Singapore Airlines SFO to Singapore round-trip for the same dates was about $4,000. And considering Singapore Airlines' stellar worldwide reputation, I would think travelers would choose that as their way to get to Asia. And I feel Vietnam could grow their load factors and therefore raising overall profits by just slightly lowering their fares. Fortunately, I was able to book this and upgrade, making it much more affordable, but that option may not always be available, especially depending on your route. As for my thoughts on the product, I can't speak to the check-in procedure as immigration kind of screwed me a bit on that one, so stay tuned for my new series discussing my craziest travel experiences for the full breakdown of that, including things to keep in mind if planning a trip to Vietnam. The good thing is that none of that is of any fault of the airline, but it does affect travel here in general. The airport in Ho Chi Minh isn't too grand and it is starting to become overcrowded. Fortunately, the new airport's construction has begun and I'm very excited to return once that airport is completed. The lounge they use at Ho Chi Minh is perfect for the size of crowds they tend to have, and it does have some nice spaces, although it could use some more charging ports in my opinion, although it did seem to have the best lounge food I have ever seen in my travel. The weirdest part was that upgraded passengers don't get free lounge access. Made weirder by the fact that departing San Francisco, I asked the Virgin Atlantic Clubhouse, the main SkyTeam lounge at SFO, if I would get access and was told that all SkyTeam passengers with a business class boarding pass could gain access. So maybe this is only an issue at Vietnam Airlines' own lounges? I don't know. The boarding process was super easy and the cabin feels ginormous, partially due to the cabin size of the A350, but also due to the lack of overhead compartments in the center of the business class cabin. The colors are somewhat dull, but the seats themselves are a great space for flights of this length. They're a fairly standard reverse herringbone setup, which unfortunately doesn't offer as much privacy as other products that exist, but in a 1-2-1 configuration, it does allow for each seat to truly be your own personal space. The in-flight product, in my opinion, is some of the best. I really enjoyed the food and beverage choices, and the crew was some of the most amazing crew I've ever dealt with in flight. So the question is always, would I fly them again? And in this case, I would say absolutely. If just flying to Vietnam, I'd probably purchase premium economy and upgrade again like I did today, but on flights transiting onto the rest of Asia, I'll bet you could find better deals on outright business class tickets. I do hope that this route proves successful long term as it gives a great connection between two regions that have plenty of connections, and any extra nonstop options are always a win for the industry. But let me know your thoughts on this product and the route offered by Vietnam Airlines. And until next Sunday, safe travels, and I'll see y'all next time.